set the ball rolling here. So I'm giving an overview of the energy efficiency and demand side efforts in Tamil Nadu, and also focus a little bit on renewable energy steps that's been taken. So it kind of has a combination of these steps which the government has taken from their side. So at the national level, Tamil Nadu Electricity Inspectorate is in charge of the Energy Conservation Building Code. It's been amended but not notified as yet, so the work still remains. Another program which they take care of is Perform, Achieve and Trade. It is basically industry related carbon capping kind of a system. They've got 41 designated consumers as of January 2016. And it's been updated in March. I think Sumedha will probably be able to tell us a little bit more on that. Energy savings in between 2012 to 15 is 233 million tons of energy efficiency. And at the national level, they have a domestic efficient lighting program. It's not rolled out in Tamil Nadu. There's no agreement in place. But the idea is, in fact, I went to Tandetco yesterday and I happened to see the DLP implementers going there with a file to start the process. So they do have a consultant in Tandetco working on this particular aspect right now. But DLP ESL, which is the implementing body for DLP, has got a nationwide agreement with railways. So the railways, Southern Railways in Tamil Nadu is working on energy efficiency schemes through LED light bulbs, etc. Again, you do have a solar pumping system which is also being implemented. This is again, it's both a national level and state scheme. They are using solar pumps. Again, it's got combination of energy efficiency as well as solar technology in it. At the state level, the government has passed a number of orders. In 2008, they have passed an order on energy conservation in government buildings. They have banned incandescent lamps. It's another order that's been passed in 2010. Another government order has been procurement of 3-star rating electrical equipments and appliances. They've also taken, other than the designated entities, they've also taken steps to have energy audit for consumers having voltage exceeding 650 volts in the state. So, not sure about the progress of it. I've not been able to get the number of people they have kind of come across. They have kind of did the energy audit on. But they have done energy audits on government buildings. Almost all the government buildings, they have been doing regular annual energy audits. In terms of they've got a state energy conservation fund which provides training and awareness programs on ECBC, Energy Conservation Building Code. And also they've also launched pilot schemes on SME clusters or worked on switch pumping, etc. At the city or municipal level, there's a LED street lighting program. It's at 2 levels. One is Corporation of Chennai is seen as a separate entity here through the Chennai Mega City Development Mission. It's also funded by the KFW. At the municipal level, there's an Integrated Urban Development Mission. So all these combine, and I know they are focused mainly on efficient street lighting, LED street lights. So the numbers are given. We've got around 48,000 streetlights installed as of July 2016. 61,000, according to their figure, they have to start work on that as of July 2016. Other municipalities, they've done more than 3 lakh existing streetlights have been changed. Retrofitting for 98,000 has been completed. Solar street lighting is another thing they are focusing on. There's been an anecdote saying that solar street lights don't work in the rural areas or anything because the batteries that are connected to those solar street lights are kind of robbed. So I don't know the efficiency, how far it can be, it can progress. Then at the panchayat level, the government combines RE with energy efficiency by having solar powered lighting systems within for each of the house, for the 20,000 house which they envisage to construct. And all of these houses will have CFL lighting facilities. That's the thing. The street lights level, again town panchayats are being looked at for to replace with the energy efficient lights. The phase 1 is underway. 101 town panchayats covering 4 districts are targeted right now: Erode, Tirupur, Coimbatore and Nilgiris. At the household level, solar powered green scheme is there. 3 lakh solar powered greenhouses are being targeted with the annual target of 60,000. 5 CFL lights. The idea of that house is to have it will have a bedroom, living room, kitchen, toilet and veranda. It will have 5 CFL lamps that is powering it, and they will be connected. We will have the option of having an electric connection powered by TNEB, which will be metered. The same scheme is also being rolled out for weavers. 10,000 weavers houses have been taken up. 575 houses have been completed so far. 30,000 is allotted for installation of solar house lighting system. The plinth area is around 365 square feet. Unit cost of each house is 2.6 lakhs. It's special because EESL and they have a nationwide agreement in Indian Railways. I kind of tried to see what their role is in this energy efficiency space. They've got a policy on their own to roll out energy efficiency, energy efficient equipment, non-conventional energy for their own individual depots and shops to conserve energy. In fact, for the DELP program or EESL program, they have kind of they've distributed around 7 watt LED energy efficient bulbs in railway quarters. 27,281 numbers have been distributed in Southern Railways as in July 2016. Additional quantities of 34,000 is being procured and 18,000 is supplied to Tamil Nadu. Finally, the regulatory mechanism, which is like the Tamil Nadu Electricity Regulatory Commission, they have kind of launched, they have asked TANGEDCO to take up demand side management through the Tamil Nadu Electricity Regulatory Commission demand side management regulations. The idea is that the TANGEDCO will have a DSM cell, demand side management cell within their office, and they will create demand side action plans for promoting demand side management within the utility level and as well as the state level. So this cell is formed, but an action plan has not taken place as yet for the past 2 years. And from what I understand is the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is training the demand side management cell on how to formulate the action plan and to basically build up their institutional capacity in this area of work. So this is and as of now, no steps have taken place. They do have an interim action plan which is mainly confined to solar powered on Nilagam buildings. These are all the thing or replacing of bulbs with LED bulbs. This is the kind of the action plan that they have, but nothing concrete as such.
Good morning, everybody. I thank the organizers for calling me for this event and giving me an opportunity to express some of the industry viewpoints. And the basic idea of energy efficiency are all these things related to the carbon emission, which is affecting the world over, which is the main this thing. Only to reduce the carbon emission the exercise is being taken because of the heat level increasing, because of the rain effects, all these things. So with this in mind, we have to, in every walks of life, we will be in a position to reduce that, and only towards that the whole exercise is being taken either by the government or the social organizations. In this respect, TANSIA, Tamil Nadu Small and Tiny Industries Association, we take up a lot of the policy level interventions with the government, with TNREC and other related agencies from central government. And we also have, through TANSIA FNF Service Center, a German collaboration with which we do a lot of awareness program for energy efficiency methods and implementations and other, even including the funding related issues. So this we have taken it as a this thing, and specifically we conduct 12 programs in a year in a very methodical manner when we reach to all the industries in Tamil Nadu. And there are small things which every individual can take up. One is the idea is to implement this thing through the government agencies is one. What happens is, even though there are some schemes available from the Tamil Nadu, this thing, when it comes to real implementation, it doesn't happen. Take for instance solar energy. Only they have given some this thing for housing. And major problem is space. Most of the houses they don't have, because we have not been designed to take care of that solar, because you need area, without which the houses are not designed, because either there's a water tank already, you can't demolish, you have a staircase in that, all these things. So there is no space for solar. In that case, what is the alternative? It's not there. Only gated communities can plan in those now new areas where it can be a mandatory to have such kind of this thing. It will help. Otherwise, the existing with the kind of construction which has been already there, and we have all the row houses, and it's a impractical one to have solar. Only there they are given some subsidy. There also, if you see, there need to be a net metering. They have to provide that net metering, which is not being given. You can go back and take the real statistics. How many net metering has been given? Very few. To get that also, there are corruptions are going on. This is a real factor. So we need to have a policy which can go beyond this, and everybody should be in a position to take it. They have not given permission to industries. For the same subsidy is not extended to the industries. Wherever they have space, they can do that, because they are going to use the power there itself. So there is no transmission law. Even we have suggested to the government to have we have some 120 industrial estates in Tamil Nadu. We have some open spaces available. It's very easy for the government to change the geo, and an open space reservation can be converted into for making available this solar powered this thing, whereby the power generated in the industrial estates can be utilized in the same industrial estate itself without any loss of transmission law, without any transmission law. But it has been categorically rejected by the government. The reason is they will lose the revenue, because all your Tangentco, this thing is, most of the power is given as free. So they depend only on commercial and industrial revenue, which they don't want to lose. So this is the kind of situation we are in Tamil Nadu, which definitely needs to be changed. So we should be in a position to take our own at least decision to have alternative energy sources, thereby we use, and also the excess power should be in a position to be given to the TNEB. So there is again, luckily now we have sorted out the problem of the wind generation, people transmitting the problem, that is being sorted out. Hope it will be done very fast. And in the home sector, yes, everybody know about it. We do lot. Every individual can put their effort in that. Was Most of the electronic gadgets, most of the people, they switch it on and go. They use the remote, so they think that it doesn't. But with the meters, what they have, the electronic meters, it can sense even a small, very micro this thing. So yeah, all the gadgets consumes electricity. They switch on the TV, but they don't. Only through the remote they are operating. They have to switch off. It's all minor things which we can day-to-day life. It can be done. Similarly, our air conditioners is the same thing. It consumes a lot of power that stabilizes, which has to be switched off. And all the houses, we keep the lights on in all the places, even normally when we are all sitting in the hall and seeing the TV. But there is light in the kitchen and bedroom, which need not be there only when we walk in. There are certain new gadgets have come where walk in and all these things can be made more popular. And cost is another area which need to be addressed by the manufacturers and the other things, so that the cost factor is another area where it can be, unless this is brought down, it will not become popular. So that is another aspect which need to be addressed. And in industries generally, what is being done is the people use a heavy motor, which is not required. Actually, the particular machine needs only a small motor. So now we suggest individual motors for the individual machines. Earlier they used to have one single thing with that. They used that, which is increasing their load demand side. So that also again compressors. It has to be switched off when your tank is full. But the compressor motor will be running. Compressor will not be running. Motor will be running, which normally people do that in any industry. So these are all the areas where we suggest that a lot of methods. And also the welding transformer is a major issue. Welding transformer, earlier the manufacturer used to have a two-phase thing, which creates imbalances in the power, and also it draws very high current for the output. For the same output, now the latest inverter machines which has come, which is hardly not even 40% of the total power required for the same output. So these are all the issues addressed. We are also addressing to the industry. Very, very important. Only again a factor is the cost is very prohibitive. That's where the industry people are little hesitant, but still they can take back the money within maximum of 2 years. So these are all the areas we do a lot of training. We conduct workshops and make them understand to go further. And also banks are also willing to help you for technology driven new this thing. So there are separate funds are available, including TIC, SIDBI and other banks. So these are all the things which industry related issues major, and definitely this can pave the way for next generation to have an energy efficient India. So again another area is building. So I don't have to, because a lot of learned people are there and more information are going to be discussed. So building design itself is now one of our entrepreneurs building in Tirupati. Even now anybody can have a look at it. The whole day, there is no light is there for the industry itself. It is designed in such a manner, the whole central light is there, it is taken care of. So very, very little lighting is provided in the daytime. So that kind of design is possible, and thereby you save a lot in the energy. So this kind of aspects which needs to be, and we need to do more on that. It's just what we have started is very, very little, long way to go. With this, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, the organizers, for giving us an opportunity to share some of our thoughts here. Well, all of us are aware that in India, this issue of energy efficiency began quite some time ago, a very long time ago, in fact. Right from the 70s, we've been struggling with this, and institutes and organizations have been doing their bit in promoting energy efficiency practices. And Mr. Mohan very succinctly put forth the fact that there's a lot of knowledge available. There's a lot of hoo-ha and talk about energy efficiency, but implementation is a big issue, a very big issue. It's only very recently, maybe about a decade ago, when energy efficiency took on a slightly more official status, with the energy conservation law being enacted, and it kicked in 10 years after it got enacted. The actual implementation programs, the actual energy efficiency at the ground level programs really took tooth when this was in 2001. Sometime in 2010 past, we've been seeing programs happening in real life. And the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is the agency, or is the central nodal body in India, which takes on the responsibility of making sure energy efficiency is spread out in India. And all of us are very well aware of the fact that India is massive, huge, and it's got a democracy which is, I don't think there is another democracy like India. Everybody has a say, everybody has an opinion, everybody wants to say that this is right or this is wrong. So implementation of a particular aspect, like for instance, if you take China, you take Japan, you take any of these small countries which is South Asian countries, energy efficiency started maybe just a decade ago. It's a full-fledged program. They implement it. It's do or die kind of a situation. You bloody well do it. So that's the kind of policy that happens. Now, in India, we started unbundling. We used to have state electricity board. For some reason, energy efficiency became the business of state electricity boards. And energy efficiency is considered to be an electrical topic. If you look at the cross-section of India and you look at the energy consumption, 60% is thermal energy through oil and gas and fuel. 40% is, even electricity comes from fuel. Your coal-fired electricity, your thermal power stations and your oil-fired thermal power stations. That part, okay, let's forget about that. Let's say that energy efficiency is electrical, and state electricity boards should be doing a lot of this mothering of, propagation of the energy efficiency. Now, the unbundling or the restructuring of electricity boards started taking place about 10 to 12 years ago. Initially it was Orissa, it didn't kick off, then it was Andhra, Karnataka and all that. But post unbundling, what do you mean by unbundling? The monolithic structure of the state electricity board, that is generation, transmission and distribution all in one piece and headed by a chairman. Now this was felt but then World Bank had given us a lot of input on how to do DSM, how to do unbundling, and how the structure would be, how energy efficiency can kick in if you break these 3 units into 3 separate corporations. So, unfortunately, even today, Tamil Nadu is not unbundled in the real sense. We don't have a separate generation company, we don't have a separate transmission company, we don't have a separate distribution companies. Now there are Orissa, Rajasthan, Delhi, Mumbai, a number of states which have implemented this, and the taste of the pudding is in the efficiency improvements that have taken place, because they have smaller corporations, because they have separate funding, and because they no longer pander to the politicians' wishes. State electricity boards are tools for the politicians to dole out free electricity, to dole out promises, little realizing that this is an organization, this is a managed organization, and profit and loss is an issue, and they don't get funds that easily. And doing energy efficiency doesn't make any sense at all. You go to a farmer and tell him, let's put in a new pump, which present pump is around 23% efficient. I'll give you a pump which is 53% efficient free of cost. He will say, sir, that's very, very fine. I'm not so interested in the pump, I'm interested in my water. If you can help me get water when I want water. You talk about power situation in India, fine, I appreciate it. And then just when I'm doing my farming and I'm watering my land, halfway down the line you switch off power. The remaining half of my land is fallow and dry. Then 9 hours later you again supply power and I am able to do a little bit of thing. How do I generate crops? So I need water. If you can build me a tank and fill up my tank whenever electricity is available, then I'll govern when I water my plants. You help me that way. Give me seeds. Give me all those kind of things. So electricity is not his baby. He doesn't bother about saving electricity. He doesn't bother about efficient systems. What you need to give him is a DSM program, an agri DSM program, wherein water is supplied to him. Water is the product. Maybe you can develop a small, you have municipal corporations that supply water to a city. You have a small mini water supply agency in the village or in a particular taluk. Efficient pumps, 80%. The guy is an entrepreneur and he runs it very efficiently. He sells water to the farmers. Yes, that's a good idea. That will work. But it never takes off. As he said, implementation, you don't have entrepreneurs who want to go to the village, who want to go to the rural areas and do business. He was talking about lighting of village hamlets. Yes, it's a very big issue. You still find villages on the periphery of a huge, giant thermal power station, a 3,000 megawatt thermal power station. They don't have lights in their homes. And here you have a thermal power station generating 3,000 megawatts. It's such a, what shall I say? Here you have somebody who doesn't have electricity and here you have a generator. So it's all about how we go about doing the implementation. There are so many programs which are run by World Bank. Outsiders come in and tell us what to do on sustainability and things like that. And it is only we who really don't know how to get the good word in and implement it. We talk about, like for instance, Tamil Nadu. Now it's such a late starter as far as efficiency. We are still talking about a DSM cell being formed in Tamil Nadu. The Bureau of Energy Efficiency implements its programs through what are known as state development agencies. And one of the state development agencies that has been selected in Tamil Nadu is the Electoral Inspectorate. Now the typical mandate of an inspectorate is to make sure that the persons who are provided the service are not cheating on consumption. Little do they know about energy efficiency. Little do they know about electrical energy efficiency. If they talk about energy efficiency, they talk about transformers. What are the kind of losses you have in transformers? 1.5%, 2%, 2%. So you're talking about that small little regime of capacitors. Down the line, where energy efficiency is really bad, you have a motor which is having an efficiency of 80% or 85%. You have pumps which are operating at 60%, 55%, 40%. You have compressors operating at 40%. You have air conditioners. That is a grey area for them. They are electrical people. They don't know about mechanical things. So this disconnect between what I need to do as an energy efficiency service provider, and he's supposed to be the doyen or the controller of all energy efficiency activities in that particular state, and he has no clue about what to do. He only talks about what he knows, and that is in the very narrow regime of efficiency which you can't do very much about. So we need to roll out programs. You need to have a DSM cell. You need to have a budget for this. The state government has to commit to a energy efficiency fund. This has been done about 12 years ago in many states. So the government of India through BE will give you, let's say, 1 crore of rupees. State government has to promise at least half that amount. And there is a fund. There are people who will manage that fund. They will invest and use that fund to promote soft programs like training, little harder programs like funding for retrofits in small-scale industries. See, small-scale industries are a big chunk of electrical consumers and energy consumers. All of you know about that. Now, we generate literally 40% of the foreign exchange in the small-scale sector. But it is the most disorganized sector. For a small-scale industry, energy efficiency is my last priority. I am a single man, I'm a small unit. I have to look after production, I have to look after procurement, I have to look after raw material, I have to look after bank loans, I have to look after payments to my people. I don't have the wherewithal to afford, managers on different levels to take care of these things. I'm a single guy. I'm a small unit. And energy efficiency comes somewhere in the last priority. So if you come down and tell me I'll do energy efficiency, you need to do this, you need to invest, I'll first ask you, why don't you help me buy another production unit? My old one's getting inefficient. Maybe you'll get more money if I have a more efficient dryer, or a more efficient boiler, or a more efficient furnace. Why are you pressing me to go for capacitors and these small things? Very true. And in the small industry, it is like seeing is believing. Okay, where did you do this before? Does it work? After investing, you think I'll really make money? And all programs in the small industry is a demo-related program. So what we say is we'll fund for a particular activity. We will identify a small sector. We will identify that single-stage compressors to be changed into two-stage screw compressors. Okay, pumps. Or most of the pumps that you are operating are age-old, about 20-year-olds. Maybe if you go for the new ones, you may have a straight margin of about 20% or 30% in efficiency. You're talking about, demand-side controllers. Now, all of this is very fine, sir. And who's going to do the funding? Okay, the state electricity board or the controllers will give you a soft loan. There is no soft loan actually. And we have organizations, the financial organizations. We have ICICI, we have SIDBI, which is supposed to be a bank, which is supposed to cater to these needs of the small industries. But to date, you can count on your fingertips the number of loans that have been forwarded to these organizations. Because they have a lot of red tape. A bank is a bank. He says, this is my money. I need to make sure this money comes back to me. And I need to have a little interest earned on that money. The small industry looks at, you want energy efficiency, I don't have money. And you keep asking me 100 questions, show me your profit and loss account. You need to be a profit-making company for the last 3 years. If I was a profit-making company for the last 3 years, I wouldn't need your money. So it's the things go on, and it's been 20 years. Money is available, lines of credits are lying in the banks, but they're not utilized. And we still talk about policy, we still talk about making things happen. It's all in us, it's all in the managing of the whole thing. What do you really want? Can we make this happen? And how do you make it happen? We in MPC have done a number of studies. But we still find it comfortable to deal with the big guys because they're organized, they understand energy efficiency, they know that saving energy is money in my own pocket. Forget about the country, forget about anything else. I make money first. So they understand that. Whereas in a small industry, he has so many other issues which I just talked about. For him, energy efficiency is so important. So you need to have some kind of a pill or a dose which is different. And if you look at the budget, Government of India's budget, tons of money available for these kind of activities. But there are no schemes. There are no viable schemes, which makes the government, as you were just now saying, the money is available, but no funding. There's a lot of corruption. See, very true. In an organization like Tangent Co, I'm making electricity. I'm selling electricity. That's my bread and butter. And then you tell me it's a policy of the government to offer people an opportunity to make their own electricity. And where do I stand? And then you offer people the first 200 units free of cost. What do I do? How do I run an organization, or I'm doing philanthropy for the sake of the state government? Okay, then in that case the state government should refund me all this amount. Right? Use me as a tool, but pay me. Then it works. It happens in other unbundled organizations. Because this is a monolithic structure as yet. The father, the mother and the children are all in one family. So it's okay, doesn't matter. I ask you about profits and losses. But you separate them. They become, satellite families. Then each one is answerable for his own organization. So payments are to be made. Yes, it's a good idea to give free electricity to the farmer, though that's not really the solution. It may be an initial foray to help the country, because essentially we are an agrarian country. A farmer is generating the food that we eat, and if we don't help him out, all of us are going to suffer. So there has to be some social aspect that needs to be considered. But free everything is not the answer. You need to structure it and restructure the whole policy. So if Tamil Nadu Electricity Board is unbundled, you get distribution companies managing their own distribution, you have a transmission company doing its transmission, and you have a generating company operating their boilers and their thermal power plants at a very low heat rate, that makes sense. And that's what's happening in unbundled organizations around the country. But Tamil Nadu is not one of them. So it has to travel that distance. It has to take the kind of lessons. And what we are talking about, this DSM cell doesn't happen just like that. You need to have people in the government understanding that this is happening. And we have so many lessons to learn from other state governments who are doing this and who have, believe me, the transmission distribution losses in Andhra Pradesh used to be 52%. 52%. And no one will agree to the fact that transmission and distribution accounts for 52%. It's only because there's a lot of electricity that's being gone unaccounted. There's no proper metering. There is not enough of this thing, and there's a lot of theft. And theft happens in the agricultural sector. Now you can't blame the agricultural sector, because for him, if he doesn't have electricity, he doesn't have water. If he doesn't have water, then he doesn't have crops. So you need to address that issue separately. That's a social issue. So without having to punish or put them in the back foot, we need to address this whole thing through the energy efficiency mode. Like for instance, the agricultural users are very smart. You cut off electricity, or you don't cut off electricity, but the electricity board, there are three phases. He shuts off one phase. A three-phase pump won't run on two-phase. So what they do is they put a capacitor, they bridge it, they make an artificial third phase, and they run their pumps at a lower speed, at a lower discharge, but they run their pumps. So it's like you are smart and one step ahead of you. So this kind of a police and robber kind of game won't work. We need to it needs to come from the heart. That energy efficiency and DSM needs to be addressed in its proper perspective, not just sitting in the rooms and making plans, but we need to make sure that whatever it is, let's say 100 plans are made, even 2 plans work on the field, it gives us a lot of mileage. So I hope we'll come up with some proper suggestions and discussions on this area, and I'm sure our eminent friends from abroad who are miles and streets ahead on these areas would also help us. Thank you so very much for this opportunity.
Yes, Doctor.
Sorry for the delay. Hello everyone, my name's Charlie Heats. I'm from the Stockholm Environment Institute. It's a Swedish organisation. I live in the United States, but you can probably tell I'm English, so just for maximum confusion. So I was asked by Balap to talk about sort of generally what's the importance of energy efficiency and how is that linked to the need for more rigorous approaches for integrated planning. So let me start by talking a little bit about just some background on sort of why energy efficiency is important. And I'm sure some of this is familiar to all of you, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating things that you've already heard. But just to give it a bit of context. So there's a number of reasons why energy efficiency is so important. First of all, and probably most importantly, just the issue of costs. So most experts agree that energy efficiency is a huge resource. Generally, it's the cheapest way of providing supply. So we talk about this topic of negawatts, negative watts. And most analysts say there's a huge resource of energy efficiency, which is actually, technically speaking, cheaper to provide than expanding supply in terms of air pollution impacts. There's also the issue of risk. So pursuing energy efficiency as opposed to supply expansion helps to reduce vulnerability to fuel price fluctuations, which can be very important, especially in countries that are reliant on imported fuels, particularly oil and gas, but it's also relevant for coal. And then in the longer term, there's, as the world moves away from fossil fuels, which is something the world has committed to do recently in Paris, new investments in fossil fuel extraction risk becoming stranded assets. Investing in large coal power plants now that are going to be around for the next 50 years may prove to be a very poor investment if the world is heading off in a different direction towards renewables. So those investments may look good now, but they may prove to be unprofitable down the road. There's also the issue of load management. So emerging technologies for controlling energy consumption, kinds of things that we refer to as smart grids, which are just sort of beginning to emerge nowadays, but are increasingly going to be important, as the internet becomes more ubiquitous. They help save energy, so they're a technology for energy efficiency, but they also help to manage the load. So they help to flatten the shape of the load and to balance the load better between demand and supply. So they're not just saving you energy, but they're also helping you build a better balance of supply power plants, so you can have less peak load plant, more base load plant, and all other things being equal, that's going to reduce the average cost of your electricity. And then there's the issue of capital constraints. So building new power plants means borrowing capital and paying interest for many years before a facility ever comes online. Efficiency investments tend to be much more incremental, with short lead times, so they're much more readily able to produce economic returns much more quickly. And that's particularly, and all of these issues are particularly important in developing countries where, capacity tends to be capital rather tends to be much more constrained than it would be in the West. So maybe I don't even need to show this one, but this is just your sort of standard type of calculation that's showing you why energy efficiency makes sense from just from the simple mathematics of a consumer perspective. Typically what you're doing with energy efficiency is you do have to spend more upfront in terms of capital expenditure. But very often the technologies are longer lived, particularly that's true for light bulbs, but it can be true for other technologies as well. So you're tending to buy longer lived but more expensive devices on the demand side, but then you're reaping the benefits in terms of fuel savings. So your electricity savings over the lifetime of the device will typically more than pay for the investment in the efficiency. And that's true very often from a consumer perspective, but it's even more true from a societal perspective once you start factoring in some of the other costs that typically go unaccounted for in electric systems. I won't go into the detailed numbers, but you can look at this later on if you want to, as just a sort of example of the kind of maths that shows why energy efficiency in light bulbs, which is kind of the most obvious example, why that makes sense. So, that raises the question, if energy efficiency is so cheap, then why isn't more of it happening already? And we've already heard some of the reasons, but maybe I don't need to repeat them. You've gone into them in a much more eloquent way than I can. But, just a few points to mention. So energy efficiency viewed from a consumer perspective may not be the whole picture. And when I say consumer, I don't just mean households, but I mean farmers, I mean industries. So energy efficiency may look much less attractive to consumers than it does to society as a whole. And you mentioned some of the reasons, but a key one, and I think it's particularly true in India, is that electricity may be subsidized. So the high upfront costs of efficiency will seem unattractive to consumers because their electricity bills are not reflecting the full social costs of providing the electricity. And in any place where electricity is significantly subsidized, that's a huge fundamental barrier to energy efficiency. And there's, we can talk about all of the different measures we can put in place to encourage efficiency, but without dealing with that issue, you're always facing an uphill battle. And sort of related issues that the damage costs associated with fossil generation are very rarely factored into the price that consumers are paying for electricity. So, you know, we're not, when we get our electricity bills in the US or here in India, you know, there's not a line item in the bill that's the damage costs associated with the thermal generation. So, you know, the air pollution damage, the climate damage, none of those costs typically, with a few rare exceptions in a few countries in Europe, those costs are not factored into the electricity bill. So you're basically getting your electricity cheaper than you really should. And those damage costs are not theoretical costs, they are real costs being borne by society. You know, so, you know, society is paying for the health impacts of fossil generation in terms of the amount it's spending on admitting people into hospital with asthma, or people dying younger than they otherwise would do, or very significant in Asia particularly is damage to crops. You know, there's many dozens of percentage losses in crop yields caused by generation, particulate emission and sort of secondary ozone pollution. That's causing real damage to crops and reducing the profits to farmers, but you don't see that anywhere in your fuel bill. And then a second issue, which I think you also touched on, is that producers and consumers of energy have vastly different incentives, they have very different investment priorities, and they have very different access to capital. So this is something of a generalization, but energy consumers typically have low access to capital and must pay high interest rates on any money borrowed. So this is what you were saying about, you know, if you're a small and medium enterprise, you know, energy efficiency is not your priority. You've got other priorities of what to do with your very limited capital. And typically you'll be paying very high interest rates for any money that you might borrow to do an efficiency project. That's not true so much on the supply side. So large utilities tend to have much more ready access to capital, and so they're much more inclined to invest in what they know, which is expanding supply. So this sort of gap, you know, between consumers and producers and the different perspectives they have, that gap tells you that there ought to be a strong role for government in helping to address this issue. So, you know, we know it makes sense if we step back and take a sort of wider social perspective of it, but we know it's not happening. So I think that's a sort of signal that there's a role for better planning and a role for government intervention to try and fix this problem. But, you know, doing efficiency is difficult. And let me just say something of a sort of historical word about how things have sort of played out in the US and to a certain extent in Europe. So promoting efficiency through regulated demand-side management was once quite common in the US, slightly less so in Europe, but particularly common in the US, where you had a highly regulated system. So in many jurisdictions in the US particularly, utilities were required to demonstrate that they had plans for meeting future energy demands at least cost, and their least cost plans were required to include all possibilities, both supply expansion and energy efficiency. And they were also required to, in some states, to actually take into account environmental externalities. So they actually had to show, you know, the way we're going to meet supply is the least cost, and we will prove it based on looking at, you know, investments we could make in efficiency or investments we could make in supply expansion. So that was a system that existed in the US up until the early 1990s. And in some environments, electric prices were actually, the prices themselves were actually regulated. So the private utilities were allowed to charge a price for electricity that was basically cost plus pricing. You know, they were given a certain regulated profit margin by the regulator. But in the early to sort of mid-1990s, that system was basically swept away. So we had this sort of era of deregulation, not so much privatization in the US, but deregulation and liberalization. And much of that was swept away in favor of just letting the market set the price. And as a result, you know, DSM programs really hurt, and, you know, DSM programs really fell by the wayside too. So, but not just that, there was also this deregulation process basically took government out of the business of being involved in monitoring efficiency and sort of planning for efficiency. So you've got this situation now where there's not so much expertise in government agencies and ministries to be able to think about efficiency. So they don't tend to have very good access to data, they don't tend to do any planning of this issue, and that's really a big issue now. But efficiency is also difficult in planned systems, so, which is more like the situation you have here, although that's something of a generalization. So, as I said before, in a planned system, subsidies and cross-subsidies tend to make energy efficiency less attractive to consumers, so it's a huge barrier I know here. State utilities tend to be, you said it much better than I could, I don't think I dare put it in quite such political terms, but state utilities tend to be tightly controlled by politicians, and what access they do have to capital tends to be very highly directed by those politicians. So, they really focus on what they know best, which is supply expansion. And they don't really have any incentives, or they don't really have the core expertise to be pursuing energy efficiency. And regulatory environments, are rarely explicitly promoting DSM. So why is DSM back on the agenda now? Well, I think there's a number of reasons why it's really coming back into prominence again now. In very general terms, there's limited supplies of cheap, low sulfur coal. And that really calls into question the ability for many countries just to keep expanding supply on the basis of, more and more production from coal. But also supply alternatives are rapidly evolving. So large, centralized, utility-owned fossil-fired facilities are facing increasing competition from decentralized renewable supplies, so most notably wind and solar. Wind and solar are not quite there, even if you ignore the environmental externalities, they're not quite able to compete with the very cheapest coal yet, but it's only a matter of time. In 10-15 years, I think people are very confident that solar will just be knocking coal out, and coal won't seem to make sense. I was reading the newspaper this morning down in the breakfast table, and I noticed that I think the large Indian coal-fired utility that was going to do a joint venture in Sri Lanka, that's just been cancelled. They announced this morning. So there was going to be a large coal-fired plant in Trincomalee. That's going to be cancelled, and they're looking at doing renewable supplies as an alternative. So just the economics is changing very rapidly. The technology is evolving very, very quickly now. So we're not in a situation we were 20 years ago where, all the economics tended to favour fossil-fired generation. It was only really by pushing the issue of environmental externalities that you could say, the economics don't work. But nowadays, even ignoring environmental externalities, the technology is changing so rapidly that renewables are starting to look extremely attractive. And that's only going to go in one direction. Right? And then third point is that our understanding of the seriousness of air pollution and climate change, our understanding of the science has really evolved greatly over the last 10-20 years. We have a much better idea now of how urgent and how serious climate change is. But we're also starting to understand how serious air pollution issues are. So, air pollution has continued to get rapidly worse particularly in Asia. And we're really starting to understand the health and ecosystem impacts of that now. So it really is reaching a breaking point where we can't continue to sort of increase those levels of pollution. And there's just a little picture there, which is one I saw recently of, that's not India, that's Kazakhstan, that's Almaty, but it's a temperature inversion, just demonstrating what the air pollution looks like in that city. But what are some of the challenges in planning for energy efficiency? So achieving the right, so the issue with energy efficiency is what's the right amount to do? How do you achieve the right level of balance between demand and supply? So to do that, you really need to take a very careful look at what resources are available both on the demand and the supply side. So there's a technique available called integrated resource planning, which combines supply and demand side management in a framework that can help you work out what's the least cost combination of those technologies. And the way our IRP works is to take a kind of an energy service perspective. So rather than talking about, what's going to be the demand for electricity in the future, it looks at what are the demand for the basic energy end-use services that you require. So that might be, rather than thinking about electricity, you think about cooking or lighting or heating or pumping water, those kinds of things. So similar to what you were talking about earlier. But there's significant challenges in implementing integrated resource planning. And maybe the first and most important ones is that it requires detailed end-use data about alternative end uses and alternative technologies. And that data are rarely readily available, and they're almost never systematically collected on a regular basis. Where data does exist, it may be proprietary to utilities, or at least it may be something that utilities don't want to share with wider ministries who are trying to oversee them. So it can be very hard to access. Or it may only be available from less credible sources. So it might be something that's harder to make an argument. If you're basing your argument on a survey that was done by an academic as opposed to official government ministry data, that reduces the credibility of your argument. So collecting, and we've been trying to do some of that recently, and it's very hard to find that kind of data. You can typically find data at the state level on what's the total electricity consumption in households, or what's the total electricity consumption by subsector in industry. But try and find data on how much energy is used for lighting versus refrigeration versus air conditioning, and good luck with that. It's very difficult. There's some survey data, but it's not data that's collected regularly and systematically, and you really need that in order to be able to make sensible decisions. You need it just to know sort of where you stand today. Second issue is that properly thinking about energy efficiency may, and in many sectors, requires you to also think about fuel substitution. So you have to sort of broaden the boundary of your analysis. You can't just think about electricity forecasting. You have to think about how might one fuel substitute for another? So for example, you might have fuel switching from kerosene lighting to electric lighting. So you need to think about what's the efficiency of the two different technologies, and as people's incomes grow, how quickly are they likely to switch from kerosene lights to electric lights? And then, what type of electric lights might they use in the future? So you really need to sort of broaden the boundaries and do sort of integrated energy planning, not just electricity planning. So all of this requires the application of integrated energy planning tools, and traditionally those tools have been quite complex, very complex, very data intensive, and that really is an issue in terms of the required expertise. So typically the kind of expertise that you need to use those tools well is in very short supply. Typically it might mean that you have to call on consultants, or it might be that only a few institutions, maybe at the national scale, are able to use those models. So particularly if you're working down at the state scale, there's not so many people available that can use those very complex tools. Okay. So what can we do about this? Well, we could talk maybe for days and days about sort of what's the broad changes required. What's the right way to organise the electric system, we talk about unbundling and issues like that. But generally speaking, we need to bring more of an energy service or a sort of total resource perspective to energy policy. So we need to try and think about policy not just in terms of delivering electricity, but we need to think about it in terms of delivering services. So whether that's pumping water, or whether it's cooking or lighting or air conditioning, the more that we can frame our policy around the provision of basic services as opposed to fuels, the better, I think. And that really requires, this integrated perspective on energy and environmental planning. So you also need to broaden your perspective, not just think about energy, but also think about energy and environmental issues together. So we're doing some small efforts on that, and I just want to quickly mention some of the things that we're doing together, WRI and SEI. We're working together to help government agencies in India play a stronger role in planning for and promoting energy efficiency, and more broadly to improve governance of energy systems. So our contribution, SEI, is that we've been working to develop easier to use tools for energy planning. So I mentioned these tools have traditionally been extremely difficult to use. You know, our kind of mission is to take these tools and to take them from being a PhD into being kind of a master's project. You know, that's kind of the level of simplification we're trying to do. They're always going to be fairly complex tools, but you know, our goal is to make them much more broadly accessible than they have been in the past. So in particular, we've been developing a piece of software called LEAP, which is now very widely applied for integrated energy and environment planning around the world. And we've been working with WRI over the last year or two to help Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan apply LEAP for the very first time at a state scale for integrated resource planning. So let me just do, how much time? You got one more slide, okay? So let me just mention a little bit about LEAP in case you haven't heard of it before, which I'm sure you haven't. So LEAP stands for the Long Range Energy Alternatives Planning System, and it's a piece of software designed to meet the needs of energy and environmental planners, especially people doing integrated resource planning. And it's unique in terms of any of these. There are various integrated energy planning tools around, but LEAP is unique that it's always been designed from a developing country perspective right from the get-go. So right from the very first version of LEAP 25 years ago, it was always designed with the needs of planners in the developing world in mind. In particular, LEAP supports this integrated resource planning bottom-up methodology. So by that I mean it focuses on the provision of energy services and then thinks about what kind of technologies can you potentially use to meet those energy services. So, you know, it thinks about pumping water rather than thinking about electricity for agriculture. So the electricity is sort of the result of an analysis of what do you need to do to help farmers pump water. It's designed very much to be sort of easy to use. It's very flexible in terms of its methods, and it's got sort of very powerful kind of reporting capabilities. So the overall idea is to make it usable in situations where data is very limited, and where sort of you need to focus on building expertise and capacity in institutions. So it is a sort of a practical planning tool, but it's also very much a teaching tool. So it's something that people can use to learn about integrated resource planning and then to actually do integrated resource planning. Because it has this sort of flexibility in methods, you can get started on it very quickly, and you can work in situations where data is very limited, which it is almost everywhere. So the idea in LEAP is that you can do something simple and you can get started, but then you can sort of gradually and iteratively improve on that as the data becomes better. Because very often the way that you want to work on these problems is, you know, you can't go from standing still to being Usain Bolt. You know, you have to sort of gradually get up to speed. So typically what we do is we do a fairly simple analysis early on to try and identify where the most serious data gaps are. And then we use that in a sort of a second round to say, you know, this is where we're going to need to collect better data. And that's certainly a situation we found here, where as we started to look at the data, you know, we found that there really just isn't enough good data to be able to do a serious analysis. But you know, this is a case of if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. You know, it's a case where it's a very important problem, but the data is really terrible. So what you have to do is do the best you can initially, and then use that to set an agenda to improve the data going down the road. You know, you can't just bury your head in the sand and forget about it. So LEAP is designed to be usable by ministries and other agencies that want to build their own capacity and become credible in overseeing energy planning. So one issue we found all around the world is that, you know, after 20 years of deregulation, ministries are now wanting to get back into playing a stronger role in guiding what's happening with energy policy and energy efficiency. And they're having a very hard time doing it because they don't have enough of their own expertise. Where the expertise does reside, it tends to reside with utilities or with outside consultants. So when the ministry says to the utility, we want you to do more energy efficiency, the utility just says, that's nice, when you're expert, come and talk to us again. And, they tend not to take the ministries or other government agencies very seriously. So what we have to do, I think, is have a long-term agenda of building up the expertise in agencies so they can be a much more credible voice. And also, the same is true, and it's true across many spheres, but it's also true in the climate sphere, in that, where environmental ministries want to set an agenda on climate, they don't get taken very seriously because they don't have the analytical capability to really think about it. They're very dependent on consultants who basically don't share the same agenda as the ministries. So that's part of our goal, is to sort of gradually build up the capacity within these ministries so they can set their own agenda and have more of a credible voice. So that's basically what we've been trying to do with LEAP. It has been very widely applied now, so it's used in over 190 countries. More than 30 countries use LEAP to formulate their INDCs. Does anyone know what that is? Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. So this was basically the pledges that countries made at the Paris conference. So many countries have used it to sort of work out what they think they're going to do in terms of climate policy, which, energy efficiency can be a very large part of that. And while LEAP has mostly been applied at the national scale, it is increasingly being applied at the subnational scale. So we've used it, and other people have used it in the US for energy and climate planning in 3 or 4 states recently, in Massachusetts and Connecticut and a few other places. And it's also been fairly widely used in China and South Africa for city-scale energy planning. So it's something that is becoming much more of a sort of a commonplace idea. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that now. If you want to know more about LEAP, just come and talk to me, or happy to share more detailed information. And if you want to see more about the software, there's the website down there, www.energycommunity.org. So if you're interested, do check it out. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Can I ask some? Yes. If you have any questions for Dr. Charlie, you can say for a couple of questions and we can break for tea. Huh? Having tea, is it?
Wants to Mr. Virendra as well as Dr. Heaps to how energy efficiency plays importance in SME sectors, traders, or in residential associations, and what are the schemes available already in our government policies which will enhance the energy efficiency in SME sectors, and some case studies where the success stories I can discuss. So this will be my agenda of next 10 minutes. So if you take SME sector, almost we have 2 million units in our country. India has more than 2 million units. But to be see the large industries which will consume more than 30% and 40% of energy, and these SME sectors quite less of about only 20 to 30. But this is the biggest sector next to agriculture sector in terms of energy consumption. So our major focus is to develop this SME sector such a way that we can tap energy efficiency as well as we can increase our GDP, because this SME sectors contributes around 8% of our GDP, and 40% of our national export depends on the SME sectors of around 6,000 variable products are there. So that's the main urge of going for energy efficiency in SMEs. And the main constraints, as my preceding speakers has told, the capital investment, that will be the major constraint for any SME sector for improving or implementing energy efficiency. But out of this capital investment, there is another factor is behind that. Anyone can guess? What is the factor? Because one is capital investment that the SME sectors will lack. Then another one is the lack of awareness of energy efficiency. Because if you ask any SME sector, they may be not having any knowledge about the energy efficiency at all and who to contact, what are the schemes available, how to improve our energy efficiency, what will the impact in our business. These are the awareness that most of the SME sector doesn't have. So the main agenda of this type of workshop to build up the awareness among the SME sectors to have the knowledge about energy efficiency, how it will impact their productivity. Because we are speaking about the SMEs are focusing on only in production, but the production we have backhand is energy. Energy is the backbone for any production or productivity activity. So the SME sector has to focus on energy also. Just roll back 2 years back, sir, because some people are from traders and SMEs has came. So if we just roll back to 2 years back, in Tamil Nadu we have found demand side management is a arch. Government has cut at 20% you have to reduce your maximum demand in usage. Most of the people from SIPCOs like Kaima or any industries, they have faced the problem that they have to reduce their demand by 20%, and after 6 o'clock they have to stop the production. This is the major constraint we faced just 2 years back because we are not able to meet our energy requirement. The government is not able to meet the demand. So now it's stabilized in various steps, but that time there is a urge for going for demand side management. In that moment, the government has framed lot of schemes. So if you say our BE has made one SME scheme where they will train the SME units and make capacity building for energy efficiency. If you take the success story, they have trained around 25 clusters of SMEs of 15 sectors into, and they have trained for almost 1250 units all over the country. That's the success story of BE SME scheme. But in southern part, that is especially from Tamil Nadu, the success rate is slightly less compared to Gujarat or any other northern states, because the major concern is lack of awareness. Then if you take UNDP, steel re-rolling mills scheme is there, where they have enhanced the energy efficiency of the steel re-rolling mills to more than 20%, 30%. What they did, just they funded, they took some selected re-rolling mills, even in Chennai. If you take Kumdi sectors or Coimbatore, then Hosur, most of the steel re-rolling mills, they underwent this UNDP program of enhancing their energy efficiency. They did the energy audit, they implemented the energy efficiency options available from the energy audit. They improved from the baseline, that is the specific energy consumption, by 10 to 15%. One example is, just if you take any steel industries, they will be having furnace for reheating the metals. What they did is, they made the ceramic fiber insulation, and they did automation of the pushers. Then they did some recuperator, which is waste heat recovery of your flue gas. Like that, they are able to tap more than 40 to 50% of waste heat which they are already exhausted. So by that, they increase their productivity and overall profit by almost 5 to 6%. Then there is now the people who already went to UNDP, they have become the model for other units to start this initiation. So this shows how the energy efficiency, once the awareness is created among that particular sector or particular unit, which will run on its own way. That's a main drawback. Then if you take MSME, that's a scheme most of the people may be aware, NMCP, National Manufacturing Competitiveness Program. In that they have almost 10 components. In that one component is technical and quality upgradation scheme, where government is ready to fund for conducting an energy audit in a SME sector. But if you see the count of applications which is received in southern part of India, that is Tamil Nadu, it's less than hundreds. The government is ready to spend completely 75,000 for energy audit, but no one is there to tap because most of the people doesn't have the knowledge of what is that scheme at all. And there is a scheme called LMCS, which we used to meet all the cluster associations in the Tamil Nadu, and we have made 2008 and 9 pilot phase, almost 11 clusters all over Tamil Nadu. The success rate is almost 40 to 60%. What we did in LMCS is just reduction of wastage in the small scale industries. The wastage in the sense not only in the production side, the wastage in energy also. So wherever possible, they tapped waste heat energy or even electrical energy wherever they lost by using inefficient method of operation as well as inefficient gadgets. They replaced. Then they improved the productivity. For this also government has funded for the consultancy and service provider cost. So like that, a lot of schemes are there, but only thing is we have to bring the awareness among the units. So that's the thing. These two things are available with government. How they have tapped, how they have done. But another main thing is, as Sarah told, energy efficiency should not be in the policy, but it should come from our own. So when we are doing a production or when we are doing any work, whether we are doing in efficient way or not, we have to justify. For example, if I'm having a SME where I have most of the SMEs will have the compressors, fans, pumps. When a person is going to for a purchase of fans and pumps, what he will do is which is the cheapest in the market he will buy. No one bothers about what is the energy rating. No one is bothered about the labeling. Even if you take our domestic sector, anyone is ready to buy 5-star AC of 40,000 and there will be a single star or 2-star AC which will be costing only 25,000. Most of the people will prefer going for the 25,000 AC. They'll never think about the operating cost. They will only think about the capital cost. So for this, the main problem is ignorance and poor knowledge. If the people know that the operating cost is a maximum 95% we are going to spend for operating cost, not in the capital cost, and you can get the whatever you are lost in your capital cost by buying a 5-star AC or inverter AC within 1 year or 2 years, then obviously people will go behind the energy efficient products. So the main urge the government or any people has to frame is just bring the awareness among the people to enhance the energy efficiency. It should be like a behavioral. What are the simple things? When I'm going for a purchase, whether I'm buying a BE labeled appliances or not, that they have to focus. Then when I'm running a small scale industry, whether I'm doing my activities or process in an energy efficient method, though there will be some investment, it will catch some investment, but I'll be getting paybacks. I should have the knowledge and I should have the confidence whether I can do this. If I do that, whether I will get it. So all this confidence level we have to bring out. For that, this type of workshops will be more helpful. So if we take our NPC success stories, we are the nodal agencies for LMCS, that is Lean Manufacturing Company Scheme, where we have done already 11 clusters, and in this phase we have done almost 7 clusters. Each cluster will have 10 units. That means if you say our pilot phase, we had almost 100 units we have implemented Lean. In that, one component is energy saving. Even just replacing all the lighting systems, whatever the conventional bulbs or FTLs are there with LEDs, they are able to bring it back to 20 to 30% of energy saving in the lighting component. Similarly, when we are doing this Lean, we used to promote the people to go for energy efficient method of, that is idle running of equipments, idle running of your compressors, pumps, everything. And second thing is what SMEs will do is, for safer side, they will buy a oversized equipments. After some time they will run at partial load. Even the partial load will damper your efficiency more than 30 to 40%, as well as you will be losing around 10 to 20% of your power consumption. So these are the things we have to focus and enhance. Which is required? What is it? Just you find the value addition of each equipment and each process, then you will be able to find energy efficiency in the SME sectors. So just everyone, this SME, only thing is we have to bring the knowledge and open the eyes of the SME sectors. That's the main criteria required for SME sector. So apart from that, already schemes are there. USAID is there, B scheme is there, SME sector. Then NMCP of MSME scheme is there, where you can buy a energy efficient gadgets. For that, government is ready to spend 30% of subsidy cost. But no one is there to tap. Already government has framed the policy, but it has to reach the people. So for that, we should be a facilitator for promoting these schemes. And anything related to energy, we can NPC also is there as a government agency to serve the SMEs. So you can knock our doors at any time. So thank you.
A small blessing on this thing. Why SMEs are not getting into that, are implementing it, are ready to invest. The major problem which I initially said, you see the difference of one LED tube light and an ordinary tube light. An LED tube light costs around 850 or so, which is 40 rupees a normal tube light. So you have, when you talk about the economy, then even 10 tubes doesn't matter. A tube comes for 6 months, doesn't matter. So cost is less. Why he should invest? So it is not that they are not willing to. The prohibitory increase in cost is a major factor. Like again in a welding machine of normal welding machine, which consumes 32 kilowatts, the other inverter machine which consumes 12 kilowatt, the price, this one costs you around 50,000 or 60,000 rupees. This costs 1.5 lakhs or 1.2 lakhs. So naturally he thinks my running bill, see, it's easier for him to pay monthly running bills rather than investment. So investment is a major problem. Initial investment is a major problem. Unless this is addressed, and I do not know whether it's going to cost that much. When the Chinese, when it comes it is cheaper, when your local machines are costly. That needs to be addressed rather than going on acting that they are not investing, they are not there. It definitely, unless the prices are coming down on the capital equipments, this is going to be a problem ever.
Thank you, Mr. Vijayaraju.
Points that have been brought up this morning about things like cross subsidies, things about this point on access to capital for financing the initial investment as opposed to monthly payments. So what we do as a firm, we're a small 10-person consulting firm, half in Chennai and half in Delhi with a few stragglers in Mumbai and Bangalore, is we sort of pick up where we're incubated by IIT Madras because we pick up where the engineers lead off. So we take these kinds of problems that look like they should be solvable because everybody's interested in a solution, the technology's there, the money works out in some life cycle sense, but somehow it's not getting done. So solid waste management, air pollution, technology change to more efficient technology, things like that. And what we look at is we look at the kinds of social relationships and social interactions, transactions, policy, regulation, the rules structuring how individuals interact with each other to see if there's something we can do to improve the ecosystem a bit so that the problem can be solved. So instead of just saying everything's there, why aren't you solving it? Saying, well, there's something about the way that credit is being given out, there's something about regulatory incentives, there's something about the effects of cross subsidies on incentives to adopt or to promote demand side management or to allow net metering or anything like that, that could be changed. It's a matter of institutional design. What can we do? So that's what we do, and that's why I'm saying why I was eager to talk about some of the possibilities for energy efficiency and demand side management at the cluster and the group level. And the reason I put energy social innovation, so social innovation is a really awful term, and we never say we're a social innovation strategy consultancy because we'd sound like jerks. But in a narrow academic sense, the academic definition of social innovation is a change in the structure of relationships between individual actors with the intention of creating a new social equilibrium. And I think that is an interesting and accurate definition of a way, of a pathway to achieving all kinds of the ends that we would collectively like, but somehow can't quite collectively get our acts together. And so this talk is a bit of an overview of some possibilities for what the resident and neighborhood welfare associations might think about doing in constructing new types of coalitions around kind of a scaled up version of demand side management and energy efficiency. And I'm happy, I live in Chennai, I live in Basin Nagar, so I'm always around. So any more detailed questions, I'll keep my presentation short, but I'm here and will continue to be here for the foreseeable future, and I'm happy to talk more about any of these. Yeah. So first, why clusters and communities? Why is this interesting, and why is it a different level than looking at what individuals can do in terms of changing lights or switching particular machines? Click. So there's one advantage. I'm going to break this down into two advantages that clusters and communities have. And one is scale. So this possibility for bulk purchasing, so conversion. So DC appliances are much more efficient, but they're also more expensive. Bulk purchasing may be able to reduce the cost slightly. Depends how bulk. Economies of scale and production. So some of the things that are being talked about as potentially cost saving on a multi-building, multi-industry scale. Things like district energy services, combined plants for heating, for cooling, for industrial heat, combined heat and power when you actually take the heat that's generated through the production of electricity and you sell the heat for industrial processes or else heating. Those things only make sense at a scale that is typically smaller than a city, much smaller than a city, but much bigger than an individual business, most individual businesses, and also kind of at a neighborhood level. Economies of scale in conversion, so the technologies for, say, taking bio waste and converting it into energy. I mean, never mind regulatory issues or anything else. The technologies start to make sense and start to be most cost effective in the sense of having payback periods that meet typical access to credit, even when you're talking about 12-15% interest rates as there are in India, at the large hotel scale and above, which is bigger than an apartment complex but smaller than a neighborhood. The types of advantages you can get from investing in a very small, decentralized, DC-based, below micro, below mini, kind of residential layout scale grid to be able to take advantage of dispersed. So a small windmill here, a few solar panels there, biogas, maybe even diesel backup or storage. The initial cost in investing in the electronics, the power electronics for that, works out much better if it's shared across probably bigger than an apartment complex, but maybe like a 5-tower apartment complex. Financing costs also. So some of these costs, right now, a lot of the assumptions about what should make sense, why aren't SMEs, particularly the MEs, why aren't they investing, assume a much more perfect credit market than you guys know exists. And it's one of the potential things like for the industrial estates, the manufacturers associations, or even what something like what Sidco should be doing is pooling these kinds of risks and saying, look, the repayment risks and the cash flows differ across sectors. They differ across industries and different supply chains. They differ, and we have industries across this. That's a source of diversification in a portfolio that could be packaged by the Manufacturers Association, by Tanstia, by MCCI, which is catering to slightly larger businesses, should be being done by Sidco. But that kind of risk pooling is also something that comes with having the scale. It's another thing, if you look at a mixed income neighborhood, and sometimes neighborhoods are mixed income de facto, even if they aren't de jure. A mixed income neighborhood, you can have a pooling of payments for a conversion to a neighborhood level composting or biogas. But the point is that at that scale, you get a new option instead of saying that every individual and every business has to be creditworthy enough. So, and this is separate from the other advantage of clusters and communities, which is that there are also these system level savings. So you can click to the next actually. So industrial symbiosis, which is basically where one business's waste products, and this could be heat or generally heat more often than cooling, but it could also be wastewater, chemicals, are another industry's inputs. This kind of thing, it started out, sort of the iconic case is the Kalundborg in 1996. This is a diagram of all the different flows between a power plant, and you can see down at the bottom that there are pig farms that use some of the yeast that comes from a couple of factories, and that it sort of grew into all of these different flows of resources inside a defined cluster of industries. But it's not limited to Northern Europe. This is a similar diagram that was done for an industrial estate in Karnataka. And I believe it was the Karnataka Infrastructure KUIDFC, I think it was KUIDFC, I'm not sure who commissioned and sponsored it, but the work was done by a group called the Resource Optimization Initiative, which is based in Bangalore. But the point here is that when you have a cluster of industries, this is probably more applicable for industries than households, there is often kind of a deeper level of savings that can come from simply figuring out who's taking in something and who's putting out something that's useful for the other industry, which is, I think, a distinct impact from scale. And as an organizational matter, setting up, there are two versions of how industrial symbiosis seems to come about. And Marian Chertow is kind of the grandmother of the whole concept, and she's written a lot of papers about different ways that it comes about. And she has a new one coming out that looks around the world at different types of catalysts. But I think her point is that you can do it two ways. One is you can go around and you can try to really promote it. So you go around asking every business what's coming in, what's going out, and then try to matchmake, to do kind of speed dating among businesses, and then prioritize the co-location of businesses that use the waste from others. The other is to look at where these relationships have already formed to a smaller extent, just from people being neighbors and speaking with each other, people being part of the same family, one business spawning another business, and then build on those kernels. And there's no hard and fast rule about which one is better, but the point is that it takes somebody to be an entrepreneur to go around and start asking everybody and matchmaking. It very rarely just happens by itself, quickly at large scale. But the few feasibility studies that have been done within India suggest that there's enormous scope for it. The incentives aren't there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's an enormous scope for a lot of savings to be had. And just to give a sense, I mean, this is not something that should be seen as a sort of a do-gooder, only do this for, it is important for the health of the planet and our species and everything else, but outside of India, so these are examples from outside of India, this is being seen as something that is a new market, and there's venture capital investment, as well as, in addition to impact investment, in companies and startups that are trying to come up with ways to reclaim some of this value, some of the waste that's wasted, the energy that is inefficiently used, to try to lower neighborhood and office electricity bills. You have to be in the right regulatory environment to have that value be realizable. But just to point out that as a fundamental matter, this is unclaimed resources on the table. And these are just a few calculations I found in different reports. Obviously nobody's done these big sort of huge global how much money or how many resources could you save. But as a matter of sort of international goodwill, there's a recent UNEP report that said that a shift to district energy services just at the city level, which would be promoted by cities or neighborhoods, could account, and I have no idea how they calculated that, but 60% is a big number, and even if it's 30%, it's still not a trivial thing. Just from saying, if you have all of that excess heat that's coming from ACs, can you use that for something else? If you're say a textile cluster, can you use some of the waste heat from a nearby building to power some of the industrial processes? Who knows? At the national level, there are a couple of meta-analyses of the social benefit cost ratios. So these take into account environmental impacts, public health impacts, so on, but they're high. 8 to 1 is considered good. This is 54 to 1, 24 to 54 to 1. The caveat is these are UK, US, Eurocentric, where there may be the multipliers on some of the economic impacts may be higher than they would be here. So it's particular places, but these are still very high numbers. And then if you just look at the pure energy savings, if you pay, depending on how much you pay for electricity, that a DC circuit from generation to load is much more efficient than an AC circuit from the point of generation to providing the productive load. And that is value to be captured. So a couple of examples, and I picked a few. So Block Power is one. It's a US-based nonprofit, but it is, I believe it's a non-loss-making nonprofit. So it doesn't make a lot of money, but it isn't entirely grant-based. And what it does, and this is, I thought a good example for some of the CSOs, and what it does is it works in lower income areas in US cities, and it's looking into doing more work in South Africa. They're not doing anything in India now, but they're thinking of taking the model. But they aggregate building community centers. They have a rule that they need at least 4 buildings, but it can be whatever size. And then they do a collective financial and technical analysis of what could be done in terms of building retrofits, addition of solar, any wind ability, capacity to pay. So they look at the technical and the commercial. And then they figure out how to pool that into one big project and parcel out the costs and the benefits of that project to individual residents or building owners or associations. The other thing that they do is they source low-cost capital by having an equivalent of a lending platform, so a peer-to-peer lending platform that says we have this package of these retrofits, this additional renewable, this rewiring, this shift from AC to DC, and here's how much it costs. So impact investors, people who are interested in investing in that, can provide capital and then be repaid out of the energy savings. So they quantify the energy savings that come over a defined period of time, 3 to 5 to 7 years, and then they pay back the investors based on that. And they're really not doing anything other than herding cats. They're putting all the pieces together and they're doing the social legwork to make this happen. And the organization's growing quickly. It writes and documents a lot of its lessons. It's an interesting group. So this is nonprofit. The next one, these are things that are more, so Pika and Arda Power, these are just a couple examples of relatively small companies that are developing IP around the core technology for home and office picogrids. These are people who are saying there's some value in developing the electronics and the mechanics that are in the middle of decentralized, much more efficient, very local power sharing arrangements, and they're being invested in. Not huge. So Validus DC Systems, its Series A was 11.1 million, then it got acquired by ABB. The acquisition price wasn't listed. But just to show that this is an area where in a slightly different regulated market, or a slightly differently regulated market, this is an area where people are expecting money to be made from enabling groups of residents, groups of offices, groups of industries, not so much the ones that use thermal power, but the ones that are fairly electricity intensive, that this is on the verge of being something that's heavily investable, as opposed to just something that the government or people who are nice should do. Next. So there are a couple of things in India, and there's definitely more than that's on this slide, but I want to mention a few just to say that this is starting to happen. At IIT Madras, there's a pilot project that Ashok Jhunjhunwala, who is needs no introduction, has been highlighting, and there are a couple of videos and announcements about it. I'm not sure what the current status is, but the idea is very similar to what a Colorado-based venture-backed company is doing, which is to say, except that it's on the household as opposed to the office park level. And his idea, so Ashok's idea, was to can work with state electricity boards, work with distribution companies to have a DC line run from the last substation to the household to provide uninterrupted DC current enough to run a couple of fans, a light, and a mobile phone charging. That could be, households could supplement that. And at any given point, even instead of a blackout, if you wanted to just switch over to providing that minimum lifeline power, there's never not enough to provide that level. So instead of a blackout, you'd get this kind of uninterrupted DC flow in that you could supplement with solar panels, which sort of naturally produce DC power that's then inefficiently converted to AC, then back to DC for your TVs and so on. And so his point was that if this could be adopted at any sort of scale, and I believe he got the Minister of Power to allow him to do a couple of pilots here in Tamil Nadu and also in Orissa, that if the appeal of having an uninterrupted supply drove scale and adoption of parallel DC wiring within households, that at that scale India would become such a large market so that the more expensive DC fans, for example, the cost would drop, and so people would not have these same kind of barriers to switching over to more efficient appliances. This is kind of a national scale plan. Obviously one of the obstacles is getting the distribution utilities. Household customers aren't that valuable anyway. It's not like he's trying to do this for industrial or commercial customers. But you do have to interface with the distribution utility to get that uninterrupted DC line in, and I'm not sure how that's going. But just to say that this kind of thinking is happening, and this one's quite local. So for office parks, this would be, the company that's looking at putting all the pieces together for this kind of model for office parks in the US is highly commercial, doing really well, venture-backed. It's essentially the same technology idea. So these district clusters energy systems, so ICLE has been very active in doing the scoping in at least these three cities, and I believe 3 other cities around India. I think Rajkot is farthest along. it's very hard to tell what's actually happening on the ground. There are a lot of workshops about what is the potential. To my knowledge, there's not a lot that has actually been created. The Surat, so Gift City is supposed to have a district energy system. Again, Gift City is one of those things that's coming up. In a textiles cluster in Surat, there actually is there's been, I believe it was Shell who did a lot of the underlying work to try to put together a business model for an energy entrepreneur who could essentially be the broker for energy services that come in from gas, from biomass briquettes, and then share the sort of combined systems across the textile cluster to both use be able to accommodate a higher proportion of the lower emission gas, as well as keep the whole thing more energy efficient. The case study isn't public yet, but it is underway and it's an active experiment. And then in terms of advisory services, it seems like they're still mostly small, but there are domestically based advisory services. Orja seems to be mostly looking at different solar-based and how to integrate that. And then the Resource Optimization Initiative in terms of industrial symbiosis is a trust based in Bangalore. Again, very small. The Society of Industrial Ecology in the South Asian Society of Industrial Ecology just started, I think, last year. But it is a growing area for locally based consultants and seems to be something that is poised to get even bigger. Now, so it is available. And I just want to reiterate that these things are not in place of changing to more efficient lighting, more efficient ACs, what the Bureau of Energy Efficiency is promoting, more efficient machines, etc. But they are something that's a deeper level that can only be achieved if somebody takes the impetus to act as the social entrepreneur, the person to herd the cats, and makes the connection between residential areas and industrial areas, between industries within a given area, and takes that ball and runs with it. So, because the obstacles for this you can go to the next one, the obstacles, you can just go through all of them and put them up, and you guys know this, is the economic incentives to do this are not so great. For industrial users, they're higher because the electricity costs are higher, but at the same time, the barriers to doing anything that requires any sort of permission from anywhere in the regulatory system, even availing of open access provisions is essentially impossible given the efforts to hold on to you guys as a revenue stream. But on the other side, on the household side, the incentives and the savings for this are not, unless you're sort of replacing a whole bunch of diesel-based generation because you're in a blackout area, the pricing, both in terms of the level and time of day pricing, so your incentives to modulate your peaks are much lower. Similarly, on the other side, the enforcement on pollution regulations that would say it is better to do something with your waste other than sort of make it go away. That enforcement's not there, especially outside of the major metros, and to the extent that that's not there, there's not as big of a push for the symbiosis or something like that. The financing conversion, again, there's enough. I saw in the paper today actually that Rajiv Lal has said that IDFC Bank is going to focus, that 60% of its loan portfolio will be SME focused. That would be huge if they manage to do it. They say that they're a new kind of bank. Priority sector lending should be coming more in your way. Hasn't, but should. This financing conversion is obviously a big one, but again, it's an area for advocacy and it's an area for specific pointed regulatory tweaks. It's something that I'm surprised that, it'll be interesting to see what IDFC Bank does, because it is a huge potential profit area for anybody who can accurately price the risk and be able to make small scale loans, and IDFC being more of a kind of a tech focused bank may just be able to do it. So that could change. But these last two are things that both for the industry side and the household side, this kind of credible information on options. This is something that CAG and WRI and I mean all of us can help with this. This is probably a non-profit thing at first, is because the minute you put a profit on it, then you have to say, well, why are you telling me this? And then coalition brokering. So these two things may be necessary to start what will probably take off on its own is, but they are that initial sort of start of taking advantage of the group and the social capital is could have a huge effect given where the bigger economic incentives and technology possibilities are today. So that's all. Happy to answer questions now or later. Actually, we're probably running late, so I'm in the way of lunch, but.
Correcting whatever you have said about cluster approach, wherever the clusters are there, it's easier to implement this kind of initiatives. Only thing is, even there we have trained in Trichy and also in Hosur. The association has created a common facility center where complete all the materials are bought in one place, sold at a very, very economical price. It is running successfully. Well, it is BHL and services as well as in Hosur Industrial Estate. But when it comes to energy efficiency services, we have to get all the bureaucracy hurdles are there, which we cannot get into that as a provider. As I told you even earlier, we have suggested to create an industrial estate wherever there is an open space. You can start a solar power plant. Give the permission to the industrial associations. They will start, they will run it. Funding also can be had from other sources, but permissions not given due to political reasons.
So this is where almost, I mean, you have to. What we heard that Ambattur Industrial Estate had done around building some of the internal drainage, basically leapfrogging, going straight to the national government, taking advantage of some, I guess, individual ability to get to the right decision makers, to just say we want to be a demonstration area, we'll form an SPV, develop our own drainage system, and then anything outside the walls has to go to PWD. But, and I think the only way around that would be to go on this campaign to say we're going to be a net zero innovation industrial cluster, get some kind of national headline, become your own demonstration project, and show how it can be done. Because obviously anything that has to work on, anything that can't get out of the existing tangle by becoming some special pet project is just going to be drowned in all the tiny permissions that have to happen. And I think that the prospects of deep distribution company reform, I mean, we've just seen the third iteration of a bailout. I don't know why, but I mean, it's less likely to happen than becoming the South Indian poster child for net zero.
Is working on suggesting something to the national government or the state government. I mean, policy interventions.
Oh, we can suggest a way, but the fundamental, I mean, I wrote a column in Mint yesterday actually on cross subsidies, saying all of this kind of political attention to like the give it up politics and kind of trying to get subsidies back from the wealthy, that's a bit of a sideshow compared to this problem of dealing with cross subsidies. And so we can suggest a way, and everybody tweets and Facebooks and talks about it, but fundamentally, we all know it takes a long time to dislodge very deeply entrenched incentives. So I would personally bet more on becoming a headline tweet from the PMO on net zero industrial estate as that is a route than like a big broad change. Because once you do it, those kinds of lighthouse things, those kinds of showing that it can be done, here it is in India and this is not in Denmark, can be extremely powerful. But it's how to get a little bit of room to be that lighthouse. And it's not undoable, I mean, but I think that might be a better way to think about it. So we can suggest that, and we can help with that.
Anything from the resident welfare side would you like to say a few? Any questions to ask?
From a residential point of view, I just today in the solar power building possibly near about this. You could see that. But once here about any system of evacuating. Because using a battery with a great capacity is not going to be much use. So this way of evacuating the power, especially daytime you get the power generated and you need most of it in the night. So they cannot, storage is not that easy. So very initiative being taken, we see that this is pushed to this income. This sort of course, consumption may be maybe less than what it was doing, but even do have it. And people are willing to spend money on that. So they won't. They might be able to, provided they are able to. Maybe the energy is getting generated. I don't know if anything is being done in that direction. Because I don't think so.
So, in a lot of states there's a cap, like a 1 megawatt feed-in, so it essentially prevents any of the commercial and industrial customers from opting out of the system. But that's a great topic for the next one. But in terms of, on the efficiency and demand side, management side, so instead of giving power back, reducing the power that's needed. In some of these new areas and some of the new office complexes, looking at different AC solutions. That cooling is there's enormous potential that's kind of disincentivized by the way that the rental market and commercial real estate works. But that's a human institutional issue as opposed to a fundamental technology problem or a finance problem. So, actually, I think we're just about to have a talk on building energy efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we can segue into that.
I work with the World Resources Institute based out of Bangalore, and I'll be talking about energy efficient appliances and buildings. I think I don't need to stress the importance of energy efficiency enough in this room today. I guess everyone understands how important energy efficiency is, and we have all sorts of barriers to why we don't want to invest in energy efficiency, but I still feel that as individuals in our own homes and houses, we can make a difference by making the most efficient choices when it comes to buying equipment and appliances. And I think whenever we are, in that kind of a situation where we have to make this decision, we also have to think that we are still very privileged class of people in this country who have access to electricity mostly 24/7, if not with the outages happening elsewhere in the city. But we constitute a percentage which is very privileged, and we are forgetting that the kind of cross subsidies that we enjoy as residential consumers, if they were to be passed on to people residing in the rural areas and improving the electricity access in those rural areas, it could be immense. The potential could be immense. So whatever we can do to contribute to that national cause of electrifying houses through our efficient purchases would be a step in that right direction. And I'll just briefly talk about some of the things on the appliances and the building side in the energy efficiency sector. So looking at just India and what we are, what the situation is in India with respect to the acts that we have. So we have the Energy Conservation Act, and if you can divide the location of that act into a timeline, there was a pre-EC Act era and there's a post-EC Act era. So before the Energy Conservation Act came out in 2001, there were voluntary initiatives by industry. There were voluntary profession involvements. We had gentlemen from NPC who can talk about how things were very different before the EC Act came in. And post the EC Act, we have had establishment of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency at the center, which is the sole body at the national level which is exclusively for energy efficiency measures and interventions. And then we, through the kind of push, to give importance to energy efficiency, the Prime Minister incorporated the National Mission of on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, or NMEEE, as a part of the 6 national missions in India. So post that we have seen several interventions. For example, the PAT scheme came out, the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme for industries, where designated consumers are required to meet specific energy consumption targets. And since then we have seen a launch of programs including the Standards and Labeling Program, which I'll be talking about. The Energy Conservation Act, in its holistic picture, it provides, it's the it's the umbrella at which we are looking at when we talk about the kind of powers and the kind of authority the central and the state government agencies have over energy efficiency. So it specifies it gives the central and the state governments the power to specify energy consumption standards for equipment and appliances that they feel are important. They can direct mandatory display of label on the notified equipment. They can prohibit the sale and the manufacture of inefficient equipment, and also notify energy intensive industries, establishments including commercial buildings as designated consumers. They can also establish and prescribe energy consumption norms and standards for these designated consumers, and through that we have the PAT scheme, which was designed by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. We also have something called the Energy Conservation Building Codes for the efficient use of energy in the buildings, especially in the commercial sector. So, and at the state government, again, for example, my colleagues before pointed out that Tamil Nadu has the State Electrical Inspectorate as the state designated agency, which again has all these powers. But as we observed before, that the person is an electrical engineer and he probably is not looking at it from the efficiency point of view and is narrowed by what he knows or what he or she knows. So, but they have all these powers and they can very much exercise it as per the EC Act of 2001. So looking at the energy efficiency in buildings in the commercial sector, firstly, why do we need to talk about buildings efficiency? They have a large impact and they have a large potential, because buildings, as we know, can last for up to 30 to 50 years. So the investments made in energy efficient buildings now will have returns later on. So they constitute about a third of the energy demand globally. And there is potential to reduce the energy demand from buildings by 1/3 by 2050, and the same applies to India as well, because the buildings alone consume about 35% of the electricity consumption in India, and they offer a multiple benefits, economic, social, environmental benefits as well. So what are the typical components of energy consumption buildings? I don't think anybody would be surprised by this particular pie chart, because of course we're sitting in an air-conditioned hotel and the HVAC is definitely the largest component of the energy consumption. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation and air conditioning, and that is the major component of the consumption of electricity. And after that you have lighting. As we see, I don't think any of these are LEDs, I think. Yeah, so you can imagine that there is a huge lighting load also in most commercial establishments. And then there are other loads like the running equipment, like computers, laptops, etc. So to counter the kind of energy, to capture this particular market of energy efficiency in commercial buildings, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency came up with the ECBC, or the Energy Conservation Building Code, and it covers all these components: the building envelope, the lighting, the heating, the HVAC system, the solar water heating and electrical system. So for all these components there is a specific approach to improve the efficiency along all these components. It was voluntarily introduced in 2007. There are discussions to make it mandatory from next year, but currently it is under revision. So the next ECBC is supposed to come out in 2017, and it has been notified in around 12 states and made mandatory in only 2 states. But the question of compliance is again a big issue in ECBC, because even though it's mandatory, notified in several states, there are the number of ECBC compliant buildings are very few. You can literally count them. And if at all it was to be implemented, so you can imagine the national benchmark is about 180 kilowatt hour per meter square per year, and an ECBC compliant building can cut it down to about 110 kilowatt per meter square per year. The typical buildings eligible under ECBC are with a connected load of 100 kilowatt or 120 kVA, and buildings having 1000 meters square of conditioned floor area. And it includes both new construction as well as major renovations, and major renovations could include things like altering the HVAC system, altering the hot water supply system, the lighting, as well as the electrical power system and motors in commercial buildings. Coming to the residential sector, again this pie chart is pretty much self-explanatory. Major, about 45 to 50% of the load is for cooling, because we stay in a country like India where of course our cooling demands are huge. And now with the conversion of our humble desert cooler, it's no longer used, and we are moving more in towards air conditioning and AC, so just to enhance the adaptive comfort. So the percentage of the air conditioning load is also huge, but fans are still a major chunk of the energy consumption in our houses. So I don't need to go into details why we need to talk about the residential sector, but if we are to look at just residential buildings, there are two ways which we can bring down the energy consumption in residential buildings. Is firstly by just improving the design and the architecture of the buildings, which could be changing factors that influence the cooling, heating and the lighting needs in our houses. So this could be altering the building architecture. I don't know how many of you are familiar with passive solar designing. So basically it incorporates features that reduce the solar influx, the solar light, the sunlight that falls to your houses, and the impact which can be modified through better designing of the buildings. So things like passive designing can come in, altering the building envelope per se, which would involve mostly using better insulation in our building materials, and also the roof insulation that can be improved. And also the location of the window openings, because a major influx of the heat energy and is through our large windows. The second way which we can reduce energy consumption in buildings is through installation and proper use of energy efficient appliances and equipment. I think one of the previous speakers before me was pointing out that how the correct sizing of equipment is so important, and how we tend to oversize or do not do justice to the type of load that we have and the type of appliance that should be used to service us. So for example, in a small bedroom, we don't probably need a 2-ton AC. It could be just 1 or 1.5-ton AC, but we have in our head that bigger the sizing, maybe better the cooling. So these are the kind of information gaps that exist in the consumer's minds. And cooling load in houses is mostly, as I explained, through heat gains through the envelope, and especially the roof also. And some of the easiest things that you can do to cut down energy consumption in houses is painting the roofs by in a very light color like white. So you can do that, and that can drastically reduce the heat gain through the roofs. So, and looking at the efficient space cooling systems, like how you can take small steps, like the selecting the right cooling set point temperature. So for according to ISHRE, which is the Indian body that decides the kind of testing environment and the kind of environment required for adaptive comfort, and especially adaptive comfort basically implies that the kind of temperatures that are required for us to be productive. So that is about the range of about 24 to 28 degrees, but typically in our houses sometimes we put the thermostat or the temperature at about 18 degrees because we want to get cooled faster, but that also consumes a lot of energy. So just by setting the temperature to 24 to 28 degrees, 55 to 60% of the reduction can happen in the thermal energy demand. And of course, using of more energy efficient window or split ACs or 5-star rated ACs. As I mentioned, that BE has a standards and labeling program. You must have seen this label. So the first label is actually a label which has come out for LED lamps. This is a new label which has come out, and it's voluntary again, not mandatory. The second one is on a refrigerator, which is a 5-star rated refrigerator. Now you can see the 5-star rating there. Voluntary star labeling is available for all these appliances listed, so water heaters, ceiling fans, TV. So I mean, I would just like to get a show of hands as to how many people would have seen a star labeled LPG cook stove. So nobody. And I think so that's the kind of information which is missing in the market, and even if you go to a retailer, probably he wouldn't have an answer to it. And and I think what the BE is trying to do is to move more and more appliances towards mandatory compliance and lesser on the voluntary side. But there are always challenges that a democracy always faces. So everyone has a voice, and so do the manufacturers, who are in the business of making profits. So you can imagine. This is just a simple illustration to show the kind of performance that you can expect from a 5-star AC versus a 1-star AC, depending upon the usage. So in a city like Delhi, it can go up to about 700 kilowatt hour per year. And I have heard from a friend of mine who actually did a calculation on a 5-star split AC she had purchased, and she said that she was able to get back her investment within a year and a half. So it's depending, because again Delhi summers are much longer, so you have to factor in what you're running or the usage of your air conditioning is. So some of the things that common services that we can look at, and the reduction in the energy consumption in these common services like lifts and these common areas which require lighting and water pumping, for example. These are some of the steps that you can take. So lighting can be again for common areas, especially in the lobby area or in the streets surrounding the parks. If you could go for just LEDs. For water pumping, again using the correctly sized pumping systems or VFDs for all the pumps. Lifts again remains a slightly silent energy consumer in especially in large residential complexes, but there is a possibility to reduce electricity consumption in lifts as well through better motors and through things like efficient braking systems and improving the lighting inside the lifts. So there is potential. It's just as to how we capture that potential. So this is mostly about the efficient appliances and building side. We have some experiences to share. A colleague of mine was supposed to do this presentation, and I'm doing it on her behalf. But we partnered with an organization called Tide, which is based out of Bangalore, and we have experiences from that program there, which was called Vidyut Rakshak, and I'll just like to talk about that as well.
Consuming same power, so likely you're not able to.
No, I think it would be a certain sizing of the LED as he is mentioning, but yes, he's right. There is a fridge which has come in the market which does claim to use much less power and work on inverters as well.
Inverter-based appliances will consume less electricity than the normal traditional consumption.
Right.
That is just like to have NPC's experience on household level.
As far as energy efficiency in buildings is concerned, is change over to efficient fans, which again is a normal fan you might get it for how much? A good $1,200, whereas the DC would cost you maybe about $2,000 and all. So that's a good margin. But a typical fan in your house would consume about 80 watts, whereas this one would consume about 35 watts. So if you take a span of a year or 2 years or 3 years, the payback is very, very, and this again is inverter based.
What again you're inverter based?
So which is, you get AC supply and then you convert to DC. Whereas as a man was saying, if there was a DC powered household, then that additional benefit is there.
Wiring might be changed.
Then refrigerators are another big load in households. And typically, what we find is just operating the fridge in a way that it should be could give you a lot of savings. Like for instance, we invariably, if you understand the mechanics of the refrigeration, you will find that there is a compressor, then there is a condenser, then there is an expansion button, and you have an evaporator, which is your freezer unit. Now this condenser is a gas which is cooled by air. Condensation takes place because of airflow, and usually we shove the refrigerator in a corner where there is hardly any flow, and we tend to ignore that fact because aesthetics become more important than the operation. Then again, most of the fridges you will see is that
that the packing around the door is, anybody's guess. Sometimes the door just opens apart by itself because of the weight we put on the door, the bottles and the stuff, chilies and all the stuff that you have. So small issues. Then in air conditioners, where do you place your air conditioner when it comes? You put it right at the rooftop. Now when you cool air, what happens to air? It becomes dense. The air flows down rather than up. So why have that much of space where you don't require it being cool? So you put it at say 6 feet level or 7 feet level, should suffice for your requirement. Maybe the AC will shut off more often than a regular basis. So these are all typical operational things that we can use. And as she also mentioned, the set point is 24, very comfortable. But you just can't figure that out as a possibility. My own children, they put it at 16 and then they'll cover themselves with a blanket, but they need to do that. So these are things which you need to inculcate for bringing in efficiency without any investment. I mean, putting on lights. It's that mental block we South Indians or any person has that light should be there when they should. Nowadays you have these small low wattage, 5 watts.
0.5 watt.
0.5 watts.
It's a lot of light actually.
A lot of light. So you speak be able to invest in food efficiency. Like he was saying, if it's double the cost, then I might give it a go by. Let's look at it next year. So there are a lot of attendant problems. I was talking about the community social aspect. Very, very correct. We had a case in Namakkal, which is in this place, where we NPC actually did the rural integration of all. You draw an envelope and see what's going out and see what's consumed inside. Marry the do's and the don'ts. You find there's very little waste that is required to be sent out. And even that waste you can generate electricity. So it's like a zero discharge. Zero water discharge, zero electricity requirements, self-sufficiency, a whole lot of things can be done. But you need that captain. You need that person who will drive this whole thing forward. Because everybody says, fine, but when it comes to doing, you need to build that captain.
Who will build the cat? Yeah.
Yes. For instance, another technology, the light pipes. Light travels in straight lines. So we figured that you can bend it around by using these mirror reflectors. So you can have your big dish, maybe about 2 feet wide, and you have a mirror reflector, and you'll be amazed. You'll get about 400 lux of light all through the day, from sunrise to sunset, free of cost. So the cost of the tube light is, that light tube is little expensive. So there are so many applications which can be incorporated.
So I've seen ordinary water bottles.
Yes. In Thailand.
Roof. Somewhere in Indonesia, they made a small hole in the roof, fill the water bottle with water, and inserted half the bottle outside, half the bottle inside. It gives like a tube. What of the room? It's like without any cost.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know about the other resident associations, but in Kalakshetra colony, we have a number of open transformers that are situated on the roadside that actually spark all the time. So it's like a war that goes on, constantly. And the Tangetco people that come and decide. They said there is in Tamil they also so basically it is that kind of attitude that we have, and I think it's a serious problem because some of the sparks can fly quite a long distance, and so these are sparking all the time, and I think there is a security, safety issue and all that attached to it, but nobody seems to be doing anything about it. And I also don't know what's the reason for this sparking. Is it because it's overload or?
It's partly overload and partly wear out of the insulation.
Poor maintenance.
No, major factor is the connection. They are supposed to clamp the connector, only with the connector they have to bolt it. If any loose connections anywhere, you can see in the normal transformer, normal terminal box also, it is because of the loose connection. What they do, they just this thing, twist the conductor, they put it as a ring. That is a very, very wrong thing to do. They are supposed to put everywhere there is a connector with a bolt, which is not being done. Simply somebody comes and opens a door, he will put a cutting plier, right? And he will twist it, he will put it and go. This is where
I see that happening all the time.
no,
When
it
there's
is
a
not
power
only
cut.
that. Power loss is major factor of your power loss is one of the reasons. This is the maximum loose connection. It creates heat energy, which is again it is going to affect your power.
And it's only
And low voltage, voltage drops.
Actually, the immediately power losses
Voltage drop, heavy voltage.
comes to the voltage drop. Thank you very much.
Luckily, I don't have a transformer next to my house. But
No, we had a car on Coastal Road burn
I see, yeah, because of that.
no, there was a wire underneath the road, but it hadn't been insulated properly. And some
Nadu, and so far the sort of the potential is high, but the actual realization is low. And we've heard that at the root of it is the sort of different incentives that work for different actors. And so what is, for instance, I think it was Mohan who brought up this point of TANGEDCO's revenue model being so dependent on industry and commercial that there's no reason that TANGEDCO, no rationale for TANGEDCO to support any energy efficiency, any reduction, anything that's going to result in less payments coming to them. So the whole idea is that we have to sort of dig deeper and figure out what are these different incentives for which actors, and then how do you actually work towards finding solutions towards this. Tamil Nadu, nonetheless, is though it has some schemes going on. We heard about that as well, and we also heard about how the capital, the issue of who's going to actually put that money up front, and the issue of awareness, and how those two need to sort of go hand in hand together. I think what really resonated the maximum was when Jessica began talking about how communities and clusters can actually start finding solutions, and that we don't really need to depend on policy and regulation for everything. I mean, yes, there is a role that policy and regulation will play, but it's not necessary that we all have to sit and wait till that happens before we start realizing some of the benefits of energy efficiency. And I think at the bottom line is several of the comments that came up, and Sumedha also talked about in the context of Vidyut Rakshak in Bangalore, that it just makes sense to do energy efficiency. It makes sense from an individual cost perspective, from an environment perspective, from a social perspective, and the example that we shared about what we're doing in Bangalore just underscores. Here's a group of residents who decided that we're just going to go ahead and do this, and they're already seeing reduction in their own consumption, which is immediately translated to savings in hand, and that they didn't wait. They had no mention of the role of the utility, regulator, state government, subsidy, nothing. We didn't talk about anything, just individuals deciding that they can do this themselves. And so I think I want to sort of just use this group, which is a really interesting group. It's a group of associations, really. Associations of residents, association of industries, people who work with consumers, either directly or sort of as intermediaries. And so I think it's really a powerful group. You, as conveyors of information to your members or to your constituents, I would just say sort of 4 things to end. First is that it's clearly energy efficiency is not only about going green. So this notion about this is environment and you have to do this for the environment is not necessarily the way to talk about this. It makes sense from a cost perspective, and it makes sense from a comfort perspective. And that's the other thing. A lot of people feel that that by somehow we have to switch off everything and energy efficiency is about sort of switching off everything and living in darkness. That's not necessarily true. It's about, so the first thing is, no, we don't need to necessarily lead the conversation by saying you have to go green and this is your duty for society and so on. This is just pure economic sense. The second is, and Sumedha sort of touched upon it, but I don't think it came up, is we have to look out for what is known as the rebound effect. The rebound effect is, sort of simply put, a household that, or the medical shop that we heard about, seeing a savings of 25 and 30%, then says, you know what, I have more money, I can actually spend this on some other electrical gadget. So there's a lot of that happens. If you recall the slides that Sumedha presented, there was one group of people that were actually saving and then became spenders because they felt that now they have more money and they can spend this on the next round of gadgets or next round of, next AC was bought or something like that. So that is something we have to be conscious about. We need to have a game plan around that. The third is, and I think Mr. Ramakrishnan, I think from Kalakshetra, just before we started, Radhakrishnan started this morning, was talking to me about waste management, Kalakshetra and so on. And so this point I made earlier about, let's not try and get everyone on board. You don't need to have all your members sign up to something. It is fine to start with a few and then make those into champions, as long as we are looking at creating those champions. So whether it's in Padmanabhanagar, three households or 10 households or one street, it's about building these champions and then using those champions to take the next sort of messages forward. And finally, I think what can we do? So all of this is what we can do as representatives of associations. And so final question is, what can we do together? Because clearly there's a lot we can actually achieve by putting a common demand. So whether it is this what is called DELP, which is a flagship Government of India program, and this is about where the Government of India and the utility, so in this case Tangetco and the Government of India will sign an agreement, and then they will supply you LED bulbs, which you will install in your premises, and they will recover those costs over the next X number of months through your electricity bills. This is, so when I was hearing your example where you said, I have to spend 1,000 rupees per bulb, I have to spend 850 rupees per bulb. There's actually a Government of India program, which is a very successful program. If you look up yesterday I think the Prime Minister also in his entire office or house has replaced all tube lights with LED or something like that, something about it. So it's a very successful program, and yet it's not implemented in Tamil Nadu only because the government hasn't signed this agreement. So can we collectively ask our utility to take this on? Because there is a program, there is the money, there is the technology, the bulbs have already been procured. It's just not coming to us. Similarly, we heard, I think, from the Tanstier sort of examples of how certain consumer categories have been left out of solar, of net metering and so on. So I don't want to sort of prescribe what we should do, but I'm just throwing this out to all of you and all of us really, that there could be a bunch of things that we could begin thinking about doing together, and just making sure that there is a demand for clean energy, because we are constantly sort of being recipients of whatever services we have provided. So whether it's poor service or and we've tended to look at some inverter we spend money on, some generator we spend money on. We are sort of making that difference, but we don't really need to only do that. We can also make demands for better services and cleaner energy. And I think I'd sort of be happy to hear from all of you about what those might be, whether it's this LED program or whether it's around incentives. I mean, I think in Delhi, if you bought an energy efficient, I don't know if it's still going on, but there was a scheme which the Delhi electric utility would actually give you a rebate. So in your electricity bill for your next month, you get a rebate if you bought a 5-star product. So that, because they want you to start buying energy efficient products, and they know that there is a cost difference. So they take some of that burden on themselves and some remains with you. But there are utilities in India who are doing this. But Tamil Nadu is not yet doing this, and I think we should really think about what we can do in order to help the Tamil Nadu utility understand that consumers want better services, consumers are demanding cleaner energy. All right, with that, back to you, Krishna.
I think this ends our session here. So thank you all for coming over, and it has been actually very productive because, as Bharat was saying, the trade associations, the resident welfare associations, and industrial associations, at least there's a common understanding of what energy efficiency or demand side management measures can be. One thing would have been, like how trade associations within themselves, their own shop premises, how is it that they can maximize energy efficiency rather than just changing light bulbs, changing the nature of the way the products are set up. Would that help is something that you might want to take it forward later on. Thanks a lot.